In controlled attention studies, researchers found that individuals can alter how others distribute attention in a room without initiating any direct interaction or eye contact. The effect was measurable through movement deviation patterns alone, even in silence. In 1971, environmental psychologists studying urban perception documented a recurring but initially overlooked report from individuals navigating crowded public spaces. They described a specific sensation, not fear, not paranoia, but the persistent impression that certain people in the environment were aware of them without making eye contact, without speaking, without any direct behavioral signal. At first, researchers attributed this to anxiety bias or hypervigilance, but controlled observations revealed something more precise. The sensation often persisted even in low-stimulus environments and among individuals with no history of anxiety disorders. What emerged was not a psychological flaw in perception, but a consistent response to specific patterns of human presence. If awareness of another person can be triggered without direct interaction, then what exactly is being detected, and by whom? The mechanism at the center of this phenomenon is not being watched in the literal sense. It is perceived attentional anchoring, a subtle alignment of posture, spatial control, and micro-behavioral signaling that shifts how others unconsciously allocate attention. In cognitive psychology, attention is not passive. It is continuously redistributed based on perceived relevance and threat salience. Daniel Kahneman's work on attentional systems showed that the brain prioritizes stimuli that appear to be monitoring us, even indirectly. This video examines how certain individuals generate that perception without overt action. By the end, you will recognize the difference between actual observation and the behavioral architecture that produces the feeling of being observed, not through superstition, through measurable social and perceptual mechanisms. In observational studies of group dynamics, researchers noted that some individuals consistently altered the movement patterns of others without speaking or initiating contact. People adjusted walking paths, shifted seating positions, reoriented their bodies slightly away or toward them without conscious awareness. No direct gaze was required. The trigger was subtle, spatial occupation combined with stillness. The human brain interprets controlled stillness not as absence of action, but as potential action. Potentiality is enough to activate attention. Detection tool. Observe individuals who occupy space without unnecessary movement in dynamic environments. If others unconsciously reroute around them, attention is being redistributed toward that presence. This is the foundation. But spatial dominance alone does not explain the feeling of being watched. It requires the second layer, gaze behavior. Eye tracking research shows that humans are highly sensitive to peripheral detection of gaze direction, even when no direct eye contact occurs. Some individuals maintain a stable visual field awareness that subtly aligns with movement around them. They are not staring, they are tracking indirectly through environmental awareness. Observers interpret this as feeling seen without confirmation. The brain does not require direct gaze to simulate being observed. It only requires consistent prediction of attention direction. Detection tool. Notice whether someone consistently reorients slightly when you move, even without looking directly at you. That micro-adjustment is enough to register attentional presence. This creates a feedback loop. Your awareness of them increases their apparent awareness of you, and that loop becomes self-reinforcing. Which leads into the third layer. In studies of nonverbal synchrony, researchers found that some individuals align their micro-timing responses, slight head turns, posture shifts, breathing rhythm, with surrounding activity at unusually high precision. This produces a phenomenon where others feel tracked, even without explicit attention. The brain interprets synchronized timing as directed attention, even when it is purely reactive environmental alignment. Detection tool. If someone's subtle movements consistently coincide with your actions, not delayed, not ahead, but precisely aligned, the perception of observation increases dramatically. At this point, the mind stops distinguishing between observation and coordination, but this is where interpretation becomes unstable, because not all synchronization is intentional, but here is where it becomes more complex. Synchronization does not always indicate control or awareness. In high-density social environments, humans naturally converge toward shared timing patterns due to environmental constraints and mirror neuron activation systems. This means the same behavioral signature, the feeling of being observed, can emerge from two completely different mechanisms. One is active attentional structuring, the other is passive neurological alignment, and externally they are indistinguishable. This is the core limitation of human social perception. The brain cannot access intent directly, it reconstructs it from timing and space. When individuals perceive subtle alignment from others, they unconsciously increase their own self-monitoring. This creates what psychologists describe as attentional backscatter, increased self-awareness triggered by perceived external focus. As self-monitoring rises, behavior becomes more rigid, deliberate, and noticeable. This reinforces the original perception that someone is watching. Often, the feeling of being observed is not caused by external attention, but by internal behavioral tightening in response to ambiguous social cues. Detection tool: if your own movements feel more deliberate in the presence of a specific person, check whether the environment actually changed or whether your self-monitoring increased first. This distinction determines whether observation is real or constructed, and this leads to the deeper structural issue. If the feeling of being watched can emerge without direct observation, then perception of social awareness is not anchored in objective reality. It is anchored in pattern inference under uncertainty, which means every human being is constantly estimating attention states of others without access to confirmation. This creates an uncomfortable symmetry. If you can feel watched without being watched, then others can also feel your presence as attention, even when you are not actively directing it. Observation in this sense is not an act. It is a mutual inference system built on incomplete data, and human behavior continuously feeds that system without awareness. Now that the mechanism is visible, detection becomes structured. First tool, attention disconfirmation test. Ask a simple internal question: what exact signal indicates I am being observed? If the answer is vague or behavioral rather than direct, you are dealing with inference, not evidence. Second tool, spatial independence check. In environments with multiple people, observe whether the sensation persists when the suspected individual is removed from awareness. If it collapses, the effect was relational, not individual. Third tool, self-monitoring calibration. Notice whether your own behavior changes before or after the sensation of being watched appears. The order determines causality. Because in most cases, perception of observation is not triggered by others seeing you, but by you adjusting yourself as if they already are. The final understanding is this: the feeling of being watched is less about external eyes and more about internal prediction systems interpreting ambiguous social structure as attention. Next, we examine the opposite phenomenon, people who do not generate this feeling at all, and why their social invisibility is often just as psychologically revealing.